What's going on, everybody? Zack Rosenblatt back here with Mike Kaye for the latest episode of the No Huddle Show. The last time we were here, Mike was about to go away for the week, and when he left, the world started going a little crazy, and there's been a lot of stuff going on over the last week that don't have anything to do with sports. I don't think there's really that much that Mike and I can add that you haven't heard from a lot more provocative people than us, other than to say I know the Eagles you could speak to this a little more than I can, but it seems like the Eagles behind the scenes on their Zoom calls have really been talking about all of these issues. I know there was a story about police brutality and racism and all that stuff. And I know there's a story about how DeSean Jackson really impacted Jason Kelce, which led Jason Kelce to posting something on social media. We've talked, Carson Wentz's thing probably came after the last episode. Carson Wentz posted to Twitter after George Floyd died. And it seems like so does Zach Ertz. Malik Jackson has been really empowered by this. It seems like he's really spoken out quite a bit. The Eagles have always been an organization that lets their players talk. I mean, Malcolm Jenkins, that was his calling card. He spoke to all the racial issues. There was 2 years ago was when he was in the locker room around this time where he held up signs that said you aren't listening, and it had to do with the whole Anthem debate and how the NFL wasn't listening to their players, and beyond that, even just the issues in the country, how people in power weren't listening to them or whatever. What do you make of the way the Eagles responded to it? I guess that's how we can talk about it, because I don't think it's you and I should be the ones going into the specifics, obviously.
Well, I said this at the time when Carson made his statement. I think it showed some maturity and some leadership capability that we haven't seen from him before. That doesn't mean that it's shocking and new to his teammates, but at least from an external standpoint, he's not a guy who has been longing to make political statements or social statements of any kind. He really sticks to tweeting about, his faith and hunting and his family. This was completely a different turn for him, and I think it will play well in the locker room. I think Zach Ertz came out and had a very similar message with his response to the George Floyd murder. I think when you look at how this team has kind of, they've come together in a way that it really hasn't been messy at all, right? I mean, Doug Peterson is a guy who, for all of his strengths and weaknesses, you can definitely point out that his biggest positive is that he knows how to keep a locker room together. He knows how to reach each and every one of his players and keep them as a unit. And I think from my standpoint, this was just par for the course. I mean, you had some bigger names reaching out about subjects that maybe made them a little uncomfortable, but they stood united. When you brought up DeSean Jackson speaking to the team, I think you saw the way Jason Kelce responded. You saw the way Jake Elliott responded. Jake Elliott not only wrote a statement and kind of made a public decree, but he protested with his teammates this past weekend. I think when you look at the way the white teammates have really kind of put their arms around their black teammates and said, look, this matters to me because it matters to you. I think that's a very good sign of a team coming together and the camaraderie that Doug Peterson has built in that locker room.
One thing I took away from it ties back to DeSean. The Eagles got rid of Malcolm Jenkins this offseason. There's a chance Jason Peters doesn't come back, and those are two of, if not the two most important leaders that the Eagles have had in that locker room over the last decade, really. And so you wonder who's going to fill that void. You would hope and think that Carson Wentz is one of those guys, if he hadn't already. And I think DeSean Jackson has really staked his claim as a mature guy in that locker room, a guy that towards the end of the season when he was injured, I believe he spoke to the team about going out there and fighting and all that stuff. And I know this was that storyline kind of faded away last year because he got hurt and he barely played. But throughout the offseason, there were a lot of stories from behind the scenes about just the way he was really taking young guys under his wing, how he was working to bond with Carson. And it's a real far cry from when he was younger. And, it's not that he wasn't working hard, but practice wasn't the first thing on his mind. And maybe being a great teammate wasn't always the top thing on his mind. And I find it cool and interesting that DeSean has really transitioned into this stage of his career where he knows he's a veteran. He has to act like it. And I don't think you're going to see Alshon Jeffrey making speeches because he barely even says very many words. He might not be on the team anyway. But the point being, I think DeSean realizes that this is in particular an area that he can talk about. he's talked about how he's been racially profiled in the past, and he comes from a place in Compton that had a lot of problems with, crime and police and all that stuff. So I I I think that's something to take away from this. I think going however healthy he is this year, it seems like he's really grasped that locker room. To get a guy like Jason Kelsey to do what he did without like Jason even said on his post on Instagram, he's like, I hate how people use social media to act like, they want everybody to know how like supportive they are instead of just being supportive. And then he heard DeSean talk and he realized that he has to say something. And I think that was a really powerful part of the whole Kelsey DeSean thing.
I was talking to somebody about this off our group chat, and they were saying what they learned from all this from the white person standpoint is it using your voice and letting the people on the other side of the argument know that they're heard. It has been made a big impact on not only black teammates but black friends and the black community. You and I aren't obviously trying to editorialize this, but I think the key word for this Eagles team is perspective, right? DeSean Jackson gained perspective as he aged, as he grew older, as he became a father. Carson Wentz gained perspective when he listened to his teammates, became a father, had that transition. I can speak from experience that fatherhood has definitely given me a lot more perspective. It's also made me like you a lot less because you don't have as many responsibilities as me. But I think perspective is important, not only in this situation, but in most situations that some of us feel uncomfortable talking about. And it seems like the Eagles have found that united perspective moving forward. And I think that'll help them going into this offseason, especially an offseason where this is unprecedented. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but the Eagles opened up their facility on Monday, and coaches weren't there. The coaching staff feels like they have made enough progress through virtual offseason program workouts that they feel good. They feel good about their guys training away from the facility. They feel they can accomplish things away from the facility. I know for a fact that Tim Houck was out in Montana last week, so he was calling in from another location. Coaches are all scattered across the country and wherever they spend their off seasons. Players are scattered around the country. You have I spoke to Will Parks today, and he said that he was out training with high school kids this past week. So and there was obviously a lot of guys protesting wherever they were. So the Eagles have put a lot of confidence in their players. And I think, again, perspective, it's giving players the self-accountability and the accountability towards each other that a lot of players desire. When you hear players talk about their teammates or they talk about their coaches, they want to feel like they're trusted. And it seems like the Eagles are doing a very good job building internal trust between the coaching staff and the roster. And I think that's very important, especially with so many new additions this offseason.
And this kind of ties into this, and we'll get into some other stuff in a moment, like you just mentioned, and we're gonna do a little mini mailbag pod here. But one thing I've been thinking about, especially over the last few days, where you had all those players in that video, Saquon, the Michael Thomas put together with Saquon and Patrick Mahomes and all those guys, kind of calling out the NFL to, say the things that they've refused to say, and a lot of owners haven't said in their statements, and to acknowledge, the way they handled the Anthem stuff, and that just had me think, like, you're really going to see in the fall, I think there's almost going to be universal kneeling or something along those lines, something showing like unity, and there's going to be a lot of players on one knee when week one starts. And I think that just goes back to that when that was happening a couple of years ago, there were a lot of owners and coaches that didn't want their players kneeling. They wanted uniformity with their team or whatever. And I think it's gotten to the point where they can't really do that anymore. And I don't think they will. And the Eagles were supportive. I mean, you remember they brought Michael Bennett in, who historically is one of the most outspoken players that has maybe ever played in the NFL. And he was on a roster with Malcolm Jenkins. And I don't know if they had all the exact same viewpoints in general, and they seemed to still get along pretty well. And I think Michael Bennett spent a lot of the national anthems in the locker room that year. So I'm just curious, like, how much of a storyline that becomes when the season starts. And I'm sure it'll become a political issue and all that stuff. We're not here to talk about that, but that was just kind of in the back of my mind the other day.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. I think when you talk about what this team is able to accomplish from the top on up, right? Ownership. Jeffrey Lurie's probably one of the more progressive thinkers in the league. If they can build a united front, I mean, Lurie's known as a guy who's been friends with his players, best friends with Jason Peters, right? So it seems like he is the type of owner that sees his players as people, and it's pretty clear that that sentiment is shared throughout every rung of the organization. And I think that's why this team has been able to stick together over the last 3 years, despite all the adversity they've faced.
Yeah. All right. We can transition into the facility talk. So minicamp would have started around this week, I believe, mandatory minicamp. It seems like that's not going to happen. I don't think I ever thought it actually would. Eagles, they opened their facility for the first time today since March when this all hit. And there's no coaches, as you mentioned. There's no players. There won't be any players, at least until training camp. Coaches, I'm not as sure about. It seems like some teams might start letting their coaches go. I think some might have already started letting them be there, actually. What do you make of that? And then we can even tie this into like just a general topic. Like, who are some players that you think are most like impacted by not having the time to be on the field in minicamp? I think it's probably like a little overspoken about how much they're losing, but I think for like certain players, they really could have used the extra practice time, especially guys like playing different positions or rookies or whatever.
Yeah, two guys that come to mind are Jalen Hurts and Khalil Tate, right? Your guy from Arizona. Tate's transitioning to a new role. And I would say Jalen Hurts, learning the quarterback position is completely different than the college game. He's a guy who's coming in as a guy who needs to be developed to begin with, and he's not going to get the normal allotted amount of time to get eased into the system through rookie minicamp, through OTAs, through mandatory minicamp. He's just getting a training camp, and we don't even know what the training camp's going to look like, right? So, the quarterback position is a position that needs development. It's not something like you can just walk off the field or walk from the draft, hold your jersey up, and then go throw a football in the NFL. It's just not the case. And especially if you're going to have a role this year, which I can get into a little bit more later, like you have to have that seasoning. And right now he's coming in kind of bland. And I think that could be a problem for his development. It could be why you don't see him have an immediate role maybe that first month of the season, because the Eagles still really need to kind of train him to play at this level. Even as a package player, you have to be able to, know certain calls. You have to be able to understand certain defensive looks. Like there's a lot to it. It's not just learning the playbook and then walk out. There's an art to playing quarterback in the NFL. It's why there aren't 32 really good starting quarterbacks. And I think when you look at a guy like Jordan Mailata, who's never played a meaningful game in his life, he could use every practice rep possible. He didn't really practice last year.
Yeah, he's on IR all year.
Right. You look at Andre Dillard. Andre Dillard's a guy who had an up and down rookie season and is facing a lot of pressure. He was brought in to replace the best offensive player of the last 10 years for this franchise. And so that's very difficult. You look at a guy like Miles Sanders, who's now expected to kind of carry the load and be that guy. What type of development will he have from year 1 to year 2? This is an important year. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside's another guy who had a really faulty year last year and needs to be able to prove himself and develop. I think part of the reason, we've talked about this before, the part of the reason why you hear about Jason Peters is, there is some uncertainty with this offseason, not having that extra work, not having that extra field work, not being able to be hands-on with Coach Stoutland and Andre Dillard. You've got to go with what you kind of know and respect and trust. And I think that could be why you might see the Eagles bring in some familiar faces or guys who have connections to the coaching staff closer to training camp, because those guys know your system, they know your language, and maybe they make sense here.
Yeah, another one I was thinking of was Jalen Mills,
Yeah,
because they have to see if he actually can play that safety role that they want him to. I mean, you're not going to find that out at minicamp, but at least that you could get a better idea.
Yeah, certainly. I think that when you talk about Will Parks, that learning that Malcolm Jenkins role, luckily, Rodney McLeod and Will Parks and Jalen Mills and Malcolm Jenkins are all training together. So they're learning from each other. And I think that that's been helpful. But yeah, there's a new defensive backs coach in Marquand Manuel, and being comfortable in his system. I think we talked about players that need that extra time. You look at a guy like Matt Burke, who's never coached the defensive line before. He's either been a defensive coordinator or a linebackers coach. This is his first time getting the opportunity to coach the defensive line in the NFL. You look at Aaron Moorhead, who has a lot of work ahead of him. He's got 3 rookie wide receivers who are draft picks. He's got a new guy in Marquise Goodwin who, has been up and down during his career. He's got to fix J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. He's got a lot in his plate that he's got to teach, not only from the mental side, but the physical side. I think when we look at, Press Taylor, this is his first year as a passing game coordinator. This is his first year with that extra title. And I think all the time you can get is necessary to make this a better go of it. Yes, every team is facing this reality, but for a development standpoint, there's a lot of guys. This is a starkly younger team than it was last year or the year before. So you're counting on a lot of young guys to step up.
Yeah. Going back to like the minicamp thing, opening up. So today's Monday. We're releasing this on Tuesday, by the way, I should say. Part of like the NFL like sent out a memo to teams, like giving them guidelines for how to like be like what they have to do to prevent people from contracting the virus or whatever. And one of the things that's kind of people have latched onto, which I'm still trying to wrap my head around, maybe you can help me here, is the whole thing about how they want to have the players do social distancing in the locker room. And I haven't been to every team's practice facility, but I know NovaCare there's already not enough space there when you have media in a 53-man roster, let alone when it's a 90-man roster. The media is probably not going to be in there anyway. But I just still maybe they do it they have like a schedule of how they go in the locker room. Like, what'd you make of that? Because I also am thinking like when they're on the field, they're going to be close to each other in theory, unless they really like change up the drills or whatever. So what'd you make of that particular guideline thing?
Yeah, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because you're going to have offensive line drills where they're in front of each other, guys on those, I forgot what it's called, but like offensive line coaches on those, what's it called? The sleds. They're going to be breathing on each other. They're going to be spitting on each other. It's just like this is just what happens. That's why this thinking that all this could happen on time is a little, not necessarily far-fetched, but it's concerning, because if the guy, you're going to have to test the guys every morning, and either that or you're going to have to keep them in a bubble where they're just at the hotel and then you bring them over, which would be kind of a throwback to old training camps. But
yeah, when they would go to a different location or whatever. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You're going to really have to isolate them if you don't want to test them every day. And if you're testing them every day, then what do you have to worry about? I don't really understand that logic, but yeah, if you've never seen the inside of the Eagles game day locker room, oh man, or sorry, practice week locker room, I mean, those are very close. I've never seen a locker room that's that tight. Like, it's claustrophobic.
Well, in terms of practice, I mean, because we've seen some stadium locker rooms that are way worse, for sure.
Well, yeah, there's away locker rooms that are smaller, but I mean, just from a home standpoint and home practice facility, the Jaguars, their game day practice locker room's the same as their home. Like, they practice at the stadium, so it's very interesting how they're.
And I'm even curious how it's gonna be a lot harder to do team building stuff. Like, you can't do physical activity. You can't even be within 6 feet of a lot of your teammates, which is like, I don't know how that can possibly last where it keeps up. And then if it doesn't keep up, then maybe that leads to more people testing positive, and then there's no season. Like, there's just like so much unknown, which is why like all the bold declarations about like this is going to happen, it's just so early still is the problem.
Well, and when the media goes into the media room, that's also used as the main player and special teams film room. I don't know if you can fit 90 players into there. So, let alone coaches.
That's a good point. Yeah. I think part of it was they're going to have to do most meetings via Zoom. If not, then they have to be able to social distance or whatever. So even though they're going to be in person, I think they still might be doing meetings via their computer, which is just so weird.
I mean, this season, it just feels like there's going to have to be an asterisk next to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of like the NBA. Like, I don't know how anybody is going to be able to be like, yeah, we were the 2020 NBA champions, but you guys didn't have like a regular season. You basically had a pickup tournament. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, you think about like LeBron's getting more rest than he ever has in his career too. Like, all these guys that were injured are getting healed up. So and nobody's played basketball in 3 months. I'm excited for that NBA tournament, but it's going to be so strange.
Yeah, there's not a lot of attrition, right? So
Yeah,
you're basically getting a free start at what is it, like a 3 month span of playing.
yeah. They're doing like 8 games and then the playoffs. So
Well, and it seems like I was looking at the standings the other day. Like, aren't there only like 4 or 5 more playoff seats to be decided anyway? So it's like,
yeah. A lot of them are pretty decided, and and they're doing that like playing game for the 8 seed, and most of the teams are from the West because the East is pretty bad.
yeah. So, oh,
Anyway, enough NBA talk.
let's get into the questions because that's
Yeah, we
what.
can go into questions.
Yeah.
We'll start with you can actually do the ones that you got from Eagles Extra first.
All right, cool. I tried to decipher through them. The two best ones that we got were one from my man John. So shout out to John. He's probably the most active member of our Eagles Extra. We got a lot of active members, but John's the guy that I probably have the most back and forth with. So here's what John asked. It seems like the Eagles have brought a ton of help to Peterson and the offensive coaching staff. How do they plan to utilize all that help without staff getting in each other's way? What does all that say about Peterson's ability to manage a creative offense? I think that's a great question by John, whether he means the personnel or the added coaching staff. I think Rich Gangarello is probably the most interesting guy that they added. They didn't really replace any. I mean, nobody was really like added significantly. I guess you could say Marty Morningway as a consultant, but those are the two guys that are probably going to have the most input in play calling because you've taken away, in name, the offensive coordinator position and called Press Taylor the passing game coordinator. And I guess in a way, you have these two coaches who are basically senior consultants spending time with Press Taylor, developing him as an offensive coordinator, helping him develop a passing game, helping Deuce Staley develop a running game. I look at it from my standpoint, from where I stand, is I think these guys are essentially tutors, right? They're guys that can give you extra, as the keyword to this podcast, perspective on play calling. Press Taylor's never been a play caller before or a play designer before. Scangarello has some of that experience. Marty Morningwood has a ton of experience when it comes to play calling and play design. So I think they are equipping Press Taylor with two guys who can mentor and tutor him and provide additional experience perspective on the offense. I think that'll be good for Doug Peterson because then Doug Peterson doesn't have to focus all of his energy on Press Taylor. He can focus his energy on the run game. He can focus his energy on the quarterback position. He can focus his energy on the wide receiver position, which needs a lot of development. I think he's hired two guys to be able to provide information and leadership and just different perspective in a way that he would normally have to with an all hands on deck head coach from the offensive perspective, if that makes sense. I actually think Peterson bringing in guys speaks to a little bit of humility on his part. I think being open to new ideas and bringing in two guys who come from, Morningweg obviously has a very common offensive minded strategy, but Scangarello, who comes from the Shanahan background, who has a vastly different outlook on the West Coast offense. I think having people that agree with you and then people that have a different kind of outlook helps you become a little bit more dynamic as a play caller. And it's just the search for more information. That's where I stand on that.
Yeah, I think I agree with all that, but I think Doug hired those two guys, Morningweg and Scangarello, more for him than for the players, if that makes sense. Like that's more of like a schematic thing than they're going to use those guys to tutor the players because I think they trust Press Taylor with QBs and they hired Moorhead because they would trust him with the receivers and Doug is going to run the show. But I think those are more to like bring new ideas into the whole thing.
Okay, and then another question we got. I'm sorry, I don't have the name for this person. Was this is more of a general NFL question. Which teams have the biggest advantage if crowds do not return to stadiums this fall? Teams with
they have an advantage if the crowds are not there.
Yeah, basically teams.
So I would say it's pretty much. So I guess it's pretty much teams that don't have great fans. I would say. So I guess like the Chargers would feel pretty good about themselves. If we're thinking just teams that like actually could be like good, I guess. Yeah, the Dolphins, the Jets, maybe. That's like interesting. I wonder if he meant to phrase it that way, or if you meant it the other way.
I mean,
I
if
mean,
you want to talk about, I mean, I don't.
so what teams do you think are hurt most by? I think the Eagles are in the top 5 for that. I think the
I think
Seahawks are
Eagles,
up there. I
Seahawks,
think the
Packers,
Chiefs,
Chiefs, Steelers.
yeah, like those, like the teams that are like really like reliant on their fan, like the Eagles. I was talking to some Seamus Clancy actually. I was talking to the other day for something else I'm working on. And he was talking about how the discrepancy for the Eagles defense when they're on the road versus at home, which is like really significant. And Jim Schwartz always tries to downplay it, but it's like the defense in particular gets the boost from it. I think so. It'll just be weird whether the media is there covering it or not. Having both, followed the Eagles when I was younger and covered them for the last couple of years, like being in the link with just silence. Like I can't even picture it. I mean, I guess it'll just be like when we go to those. No, it's not even like that because those open practices are a lot of fans there and it's really loud. So I don't even know what it would be like.
Yeah, listening to the Eagles in silence for more than 15 minutes at a time would be very weird. Like, I mean, even at practice, I think there'll be music blasting in the stadium. They have to do that. You can't just, you know, you know what I mean? Like, you're just gonna have to listen to the newest Drake song instead of listening to the dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens.
Who's going to boo the Eagles going into the locker room at halftime? That's what I need to know.
Yeah, maybe they'll.
That's a part of the experience. The players even like are okay with it. They talk about that. Like they're like, yeah, we deserve that.
Yeah, and I mean on the road it's special because it's like my favorite game that I've covered, I think, since joining this beat is probably the Packers game in week 4 of this season, and Lambeau was so fun. Like, I mean, just to hear that environment of how, the fan base kind of swooned and growled and just was upset about that ending with that walk-off pick. It was just a fun thing to cover. You talk about the Texans game with Nick Foles, where the fan base was going nuts. The Chicago Bears playoff game, the double doink. I mean, like, you've never heard a crowd like that before in your life, just in horror. So, that's going to be missed not only for the TV audience, but probably the beat writers, because that plays into the story of the game.
Absolutely,
sure.
yeah.
So
especially in Philadelphia. Yeah, let's go to what we got on Twitter. Got some good ones here. Start with this one from at Kill a Cow. Oh, that guy does a great Bill Simmons impression. He's really funny. All right, his question is, will the Eagles make the playoffs? Or he said, will the Eagles make the playoffs?
Well, this year they're going to have 7 seeds, and the Eagles have found a way to make it into the 6th or the 4th seed the last 2 years at the last minute. I just think this team is just there's so much talent to begin with, but on top of that, they have such fortitude, and Doug Peterson is so good about keeping the locker room together even through adversity that, I mean, I think it's a safe bet to assume that they'll either win the division or they'll be one of those 3 wildcard teams.
Yeah, I think they make the playoffs unless, I mean, knowing them, they'll make it interesting and it'll go down to week 17 again, as it always does these days. But, all right, we got at Irish Eagles said, do the Eagles make a move at defensive end before training camp begins? I'll let you grab that one.
So Vinny Curry's out there. There's been, a lot of talk about Everson Griffin and Jadeveon Clowney. I just don't see them doing that. I don't see them getting older without bringing in a guy who kind of can play for the minimum. Everson Griffin's out there because he doesn't want to take a minimum deal. I'd imagine the Clowney is still, no matter what, even if he drops in price, it's going to want at least $12 million, $10 million. I don't think the Eagles are going to fork that over. So, Vinny Curry makes a little bit of sense. I'm a huge, huge Josh Sweat guy. I think he's going to be very, very good this year and take a very big leap. I think he'll be the number 3 defensive end, and it wouldn't shock me if Derek Barnett struggles, if we see a lot more Josh Sweat this year. I've brought it up several times. I just, from the salary cap perspective, I just don't see them making a chunk signing. Even if you get Everson Griffin for $6 million, I'm not sure that they go that route either.
Yeah, I think it just makes sense to bring somebody like Vinny Curry and like you mentioned earlier, a guy who knows the system and all that. From at DC_8950, Dylan Culbertson, he asked, which undrafted running back has the best chance of making the roster? So that's between Michael Warren and Adrian Killens, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, We might as well throw Elijah Holyfield in there because he was an undrafted free agent and has never played in the NFL, on a regular season roster. I would say Mike Warren, just because of the productivity that he's had at the college level. He's not fast. He's not really dynamic, but he can pick up short yards. They seem to like him enough that they gave him a decent bonus. I spoke with Adrian Killens, running backs coach at UCF, the other day. Spoke glowingly about him, but to me, he's not a guy that you can just immediately put out there as a finished product. He was part of a 4-man rotation last year at UCF. Before that, he was in a 3-man rotation. So I think like he's a guy who's used to being part of a rotation. And unless you can find a really super niche role for him, he's probably not going to play right away. I'd go with Michael Warren right now.
I think that makes sense. I really like this question. This is from @Jalen Wentz, which is a funny handle. If there was an expansion draft and we could only protect 5 players, who would be the 5 core protected players for the Eagles?
You go first.
All right. Carson Wentz easily. Fletcher Cox, Lane Johnson. Oh man, this gets tough. So I guess
that's 3.
Yeah, I know. I'm just trying to think like in terms of because it's
here.
While
you're thinking of the 2, I'll go with mine.
All right.
Carson Wentz, obviously, I mean, he's young. You can basically play him for another 10 years if his health status holds up. I would agree with Lane Johnson. I still think he's got another 5 to 7 years left. I'd probably go with Miles Sanders because I think he's going to be a dynamic star in this league, and spending a draft pick now on top of the expansion draft doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. And then I'd probably go Javon Hargrave. He's got a smaller contract than Fletcher Cox. He's also a decent amount younger. And then I'd probably go. Do I want Darius Slay or do I want Derek Barnett? You know what? I'm going to actually go with Dallas Goedert. Dallas Goedert's my 5th guy because he's young. I mean, I like Zach Ertz a lot, but I just take Dallas Goedert for the youth.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with, for my last 2, Brandon Brooks and, and Zach Ertz.
Okay.
I just think you just know what you're getting, the Zach Ertz.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, like those are, like, in terms of like value, those are maybe the 5 most valuable. Like Kelsey's a hard one to let go, but he's also probably going to retire at some point.
Right. Yeah.
Darius Slay is who I also considered there for sure, but he's obviously really good, but you don't even know what he's going to be yet for them. So
you just made my kid cry. I don't know.
He's like, Jason Kelsey's retiring.
Yeah, it's rough beat for BK.
At Notch Juventino asks, gut feeling, will the NFL season start on time? Oh man, that's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll start on time. It won't be with fans. It might not be without media.
I guess week 1 will start on time.
Yes, week will start on time. I am gonna say that the over under for preseason games is 2, and if my arm
take the under, yeah.
If my arm was twisted, I would say maybe 3. I don't think they play 4 preseason games. I think it's a waste of play.
There's no reason to anyway. Yeah,
right.
Without a pandemic. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think one of those takes the.
All right. So now we're gonna end on the doozy question, which I put a lot of pre-work into, and you're gonna judge my answer here.
Okay.
Andrew Goldsmith, PhD, said if Dawkins, he means Brian Dawkins, is Weapon X representing the X-Men franchise in the early 2000s, then who would be your current cast Avengers from this Eagles roster?
Are we talking about like expanded Avengers, or are you doing like the original group?
I'm doing like the MCU Avengers, and I cheated for one answer.
Okay. All right. Go.
All right. It's not a perfect alignment, but you'll hear my explanations for stuff. All right. Howie Roseman is Nick Fury. I think that's an easy one. And imagining Howie wearing an eye patch is pretty funny. In a twist, I have Carson Wentz as Thor, actually.
That is a twist.
Yeah, because he comes from a sort of foreign land that people in his new place don't really understand. Like the first Thor movie, he came from Asgard and he didn't know much about the world when he came to it. And Carson Wentz went from North Dakota to Philly, which is very different. Carson Wentz has been beaten down, injured, hurt multiple times, and he's come out on top pretty good. Whereas Thor lost almost his entire homeland, his father, his sister, his brother. Not to spoil if you haven't seen Endgame for some reason or Thor Ragnarok, but I just think the way he has like been knocked down and gets back up still, and is proving a lot of people wrong. I think I like that alignment pretty good. And I have Zach Ertz as Corey as kind of his right hand man. And then I also have Alshon Jeffrey as Loki.
I knew you were going to do that. I knew you were going to do that.
Self-explanatory. I'm not going to go too deep into that. This is one of my cheats, but it also kind of made me laugh. I have Jordan Matthews as Sam Wilson. Oh, no, that was when I had Carson Wentz as Captain America. So erase that, actually. Forget that, sorry. All right. Jason Kelce is the Incredible Hulk. Very smart, but also can just go crazy at any moment. Jake Elliott is Hawkeye. Jalen Mills I have as Peter Quill. Because Peter Quill is a little cocky relative to like what his skills are, but he still can get the job done when he needs to. If Brandon Graham is Drax the Destroyer, funny big dude, gets the job done. I have Avonte Maddox as Rocket and Dallas Goedert as Groot.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, I like that one. I think Doug Peterson is our Captain America.
Oh boy.
And I have Jim Schwartz being Bucky.
Oh man.
Yeah. Miles Sanders is Spider-Man. Boston Scott is Ant-Man. Fletcher Cox is Captain Marvel. Very powerful. Kind of disappears every now and then. You don't know where they went. But when they come back, they're still probably the most talented person on the battlefield. Jason Peters is Iron Man. His time has come to an end. Lane Johnson is M'Baku from Black Panther. That was a hard one to find a good comparison to, but it's a funny big dude who's really strong. DeSean Jackson is Black Panther. I have Brandon Brooks as Wolverine because it seems like he keeps getting hurt and then it just comes back even better than before. I have War Machine as Isaac Seumalo because he kind of is following Jason Peters around a little bit and they love each other, even though not everybody seems to understand exactly what War Machine does. I have Malcolm Jenkins as Doctor Strange. No, he's not on the team anymore, but he's got like that cockiness to him, but it's also kind of earned because he's really good and smart. And I have Derek Barnett as Vision, a guy who on paper has a lot of talent and people speak highly of him, but then, you don't really see the performance necessarily all the time. And that's where I ended. I couldn't come up with a good one for Jalen Hurts. I really struggled on that one. I was trying to, but I couldn't do it. What are your thoughts?
He's Agent Coulson. Wow, so a lot to take in here. Because I would have had Kelce as Thor, and I would have probably had Wentz as Captain America, and then Zach Ertz as Bucky. But I get where you're coming from there, from a relationship standpoint.
If Nick Foles was still around, I would have used him as Captain America.
Nick Foles would have totally have been, yeah. I mean, I think.
Then you would have had a Civil War type scenario where probably one of them is Iron Man.
Yeah, I was trying to think of who Deadpool would be, but like, it would have been DeAndre Hall for sure. But DeAndre Hall's not on the team anymore. But I'm trying to think, like, I think the Groot Rocket comp for Avonte and Dallas Goedert is like the most spot on thing in the entire world. Like I couldn't have
well, even just like the Rocket, like Avonte Maddox's personality is perfectly like that. Just always talking, he's always having a good time.
Yeah, I mean, you spent some decent time on this, and I apologize, Andrew, that I didn't give it the same go. I was trying to figure out something with my apartment complex. There was a kid running around, but I'll make it up to you eventually. Yeah, I mean, I think your list is pretty spot on. It's kind of hard not to like make fun of certain guys with these comps, but
yeah, exactly.
I'm really trying to.
I really liked my Boston Scott Ant-Man one because I think it works because Boston Scott plays a lot bigger than he is, and Ant-Man fights a lot bigger than he is. If that makes, because when he gets smaller, he's a lot stronger. And he's funny. And Boston Scott's like one of the funniest guys on the team probably.
What's tough is there's so many great female characters, and you don't
I know
necessarily
it's
want
hard to
to pair
it's hard to like do the cross pollination there.
Yeah.
I think Captain Marvel is just based on the purely the powers, and Scarlet Witch was one I was trying to do because it's like she's more powerful than she realizes, kind of thing, and I'm not really sure who that would apply
Nate
to on the
Gary.
Eagles. Right now.
Nate Gary. Nate Gary.
I don't know. He doesn't have that high of a ceiling, is what I would say.
Yeah, I'm trying to like think of like guys that
I mean, the thing is that's kind of one of their problems with the rosters. They don't have a lot of like young guys where you're like he could be a star one day, kind of thing. You know.
Yeah, I think you did a good job. I'm proud of you.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. As you can see, I take the MCU very seriously. So
Clearly.
any questions about the MCU, fire them away. All right. So,
well, I think it's a good note to next
wrap it up.
Tune in next week when we try to do the DC universe.
And then Star Wars, and yeah, we'll just keep it going, you know?
Yeah, we'll just make it a running gag.
I like it. All right, we'll wrap it up on that. Thanks for listening, guys. Leave us some comments, and we'll read them next time. It's been a little light on those. We haven't had as many episodes as frequently, so I get it. But yeah, leave us some comments on YouTube, and we'll read those. And yeah, we'll get back to you next week, maybe to do some news.